What will you do when you're canceled due to your Christian faith? Let's talk about how you can protect yourself and your family. I'm Andrew, and this is Success with the Saints, where we help Catholics succeed in business, finance, and life. Please be sure to subscribe for new videos every other Tuesday. I plan to retire early, but one thing I'm concerned about due to my Catholic Christian faith is the fact that I may in fact be canceled and pushed into retirement early, not on my own timetable. So I try to take steps throughout life to try to prepare for that and have backup plans along the way. If you're not concerned about the cancel culture coming after you, you need to wake up. And frankly, I think it's coming after many of us Christians sooner rather than later. Let's talk about some steps you can take to protect yourself and your family. Tip number 5 is probably the most important, so be sure to stick around. Tip number 1 is to safeguard your privacy. All of us have so much information out there online about us, stuff that we put out there voluntarily, stuff that our friends and family members may put out there unbeknownst to us, and also information that third-party services and companies and governments are putting online. You need to take a minute to think about your personal privacy, things that you put online, information that's available simply from anyone with an internet connection can find so much about each one of us online. If you haven't just Googled your name recently, do it. See what comes up. I'm an attorney and I have my own business, so certainly it's very easy to find me online. So this is something where it's hard for me to personally do much about it. If you're not a public front-facing member of your company, for example, there's probably things you can do to try to guard what comes up when somebody does a simple search for your name. There's also places where people can search for addresses, such as whitepages.com. So you should check out what comes up when people search for your name on those sites. A lot of the sites will allow you to request for your address information to be removed. You should take steps to do that. Also, think about things like Google Maps. You can put in your home address and ask Google Maps to blur your home on Google Maps. Simple things like this are things that a lot of people don't think about, but it's something that you should take some steps to do now before you have some kind of a problem or before you run afoul of the cancel culture. Down in the description of the video, I've got some resources where you can get some more tips on how to look out for your online privacy. Tip number 2 is to simply stay offline. There's so much stuff that we voluntarily put on the internet, especially with social media like Facebook and Instagram and things like that. Are you putting pictures of you and your family and your little kids all over the internet? Maybe it's time that we should stop doing that. Personally, last year during the height of the pandemic, I got frustrated with the craziness over the pandemic and the presidential election, and I went through Facebook and deleted over 600 friends on Facebook. And frankly, I almost never log into that site anymore. I still use it a little bit for Facebook Messenger for some family and friends, and that's about it. It's something that more of us should take some steps to insulate ourselves from the online world. Social media has its place to keep us connected to friends and family, but how many people that you're talking with on social media are truly friends? I don't mean any offense to people that I haven't maybe spoken with in a while, but a lot of people may just be connections. Instead of spending all your time surfing Facebook and clicking likes and commenting on things like that, maybe you could develop deeper, closer, true relationships with people who are actually friends and family. Not only will this help you to protect yourself from cancel culture, if they don't see your private thoughts and thinkings on the internet, it's harder for them to cancel you. But also it'll help you have a stronger family relationship and stronger friends. So if something does indeed happen, you have a stronger support system to rely on. So try to consider staying offline. Maybe you still maintain a Facebook profile so you can check out what your long distance family's up to and see their most recent pictures of some friends' kids or something like that. But maybe you post less. Maybe you restrict your friends to people who are truly friends, and maybe you don't accept every friend request just from people in your community. The third thing to think about is to prepare for a layoff. Even if you're not canceled due to cancel culture, if you're an employee, you're likely going to suffer a layoff at some point in your life. It may simply be due to downsizing at your company, or maybe your company goes out of business, or your government contract ends, whatever the case may be. Most of us are going to go through a layoff, or maybe even more than one layoff in our lifetime. If you're prepared for it, you can frankly capitalize on it and make the most of it. Maybe it's a great time to pivot to something you never would have had the opportunity to do, or maybe never had the guts to do. This relates back to my personal story about how being fired from my first job out of law school was the reason I struck out on my own and started my own law firm. And frankly, it's the reason we're successful today. Because I was fired one day and God led me to starting my own law firm. If you're prepared for a layoff, you can make the most of it, you can capitalize on it, and come out even stronger on the other side. That's one reason God allows us to suffer, is because we sometimes need to be purified and we need to be stronger on the other side of that suffering. In this video description, there's a link to a great podcast episode from Radical Personal Finance, episode 193, where Joshua goes through and explains wonderful tips on how you can prepare for a layoff. Simple things like trying to make sure you can stay connected to colleagues and coworkers. If you're laid off one day and you have no access to your contact system on your work computer anymore, you may not can stay connected with those people who might could give you a reference for another job. You may not be able to be connected with vendors or suppliers suppliers who you have a good relationship with and maybe would want to hire you. You need to think about things like that, trying to maintain a database of contacts outside of your work systems. So now this is not saying you need to steal a customer list, but if you have true actual connections and colleagues within your company and outside your company, it's very reasonable to maintain a list of those that you keep privately at your home. So if you're laid off one day, you know who you can contact and say, hey, just to let you know, I'm available now. Maybe one of those vendors or other companies might want to snatch you up. There's all sorts of other great tips in Joshua's episode, so check it out and be sure you prepare for a layoff. The fourth thing you need to do is to save emergency funds. I'm trying to not make Success with the Saints all about saving emergency funds, but it comes up time and again. And things that you need to do to have success in life, you need to have some amount of insurance. Insurance is not simply having an insurance policy with insurance companies. One simple type of insurance is to protect you and your family against short-term financial problems by having emergency funds. This is just simply money that is set aside that is literally earmarked only for emergencies. Now, depending on your income and your risk level and things like that, your emergency fund may take different shapes and sizes. Maybe it's just having some cash in a lockbox in your home. For most of us, the bare minimum emergency fund that you should have is at least 3 months of expenses tucked away somewhere, ready to go. You never know what may happen. You may simply get ill, get disabled, maybe your spouse does and you need to take a leave of absence from work, or a child, as something happens to them, or you get canceled due to the cancel culture and you need some time to regroup and figure out what you're going to do next. If you've got a solid emergency fund in place, that gives you a lot of protection, peace of mind. You can take a minute to regroup, think about where God's calling you to go next and what He wants your family to do. Remember, God allows us to suffer sometimes so we can come out stronger on the other side. He also calls us to be prudent and to plan and to be ready in case things like this happen. Tip number 5 is to diversify and have backups. This may seem a little bit redundant to some of the things that I've talked about, but think about it this way. If you put all your eggs in one basket, if that basket is smashed, you got no eggs left. So you definitely need to diversify and have backup plans. Back to your work examples of having all your work contacts on your work computer. If you're someday fired and locked out of your work computer, you have no access to all those names and contact phone numbers. But if you've taken a little bit of effort, maybe once a month, to copy new contacts onto a list that you keep in a filing cabinet at home, now you've got all those work contacts and you can reach out and look for new employment or maybe side gigs or something like that. Another example of diversifying is to think about alternate modes of communication. If all you have for people is a single phone number, if something happens and you're not able to use the phone systems for some reason, maybe you're locked out of the phone system. We've seen crazier things happen recently in the cancel culture. You won't be able to call people. It's a wise idea to have email addresses and even mailing addresses for people so you can reach out and contact people if there's some reason either they're locked out of some system or you are. Also, on the idea of diversifying is to simply have backup systems. If you have everything on one computer, for example, if something happens and you were to lose access to that computer, you won't be able to access any of your files. This is why you need to have backups of your computers. Not just if the hard drive crashes. What if you're accused of some kind of problem and the police come in and seize your computer? If you have no backup, you have no access to that information anymore. In everything we do, we need to be thinking about diversifying and having backup sources. This applies to our financial arrangements. If all you have is one single credit card, if that company decides you're a persona non grata and they decide to cancel you, you don't have access to be able to spend your money. The same thing with banking. If you only use one bank for all your banking and that bank decides that you or the people you identify with for some reason are not able to use their bank anymore, they could freeze you out of your accounts or simply refuse to do business with you in the future. This is why it's important to diversify as many things as you can, especially when you're relying on some other company or vendor or service, so you're prepared in case one of those systems goes down. It makes sense too, just in simple terms, for emergency planning. But what we're talking about here is the cancel culture coming after you and making sure that you have a way that you can move on and move on quickly. For more ideas on how we can thrive in these crazy times, check out my next video. I'll see you over there. And St. Joseph, pray for us.